knows we don't have any formal budget, but each of the scenarios have a proposed or an intended or to be budget that they'll talk about how that budget will be handled within their particular scenario. And we are aware, I think, from all the meetings that we've had, that there are some funds to be utilized, such as the carryover in the leadership fund, which is restricted. There is the 3.5 or 4.5% of drawdown against the investments that has been an admin money used yearly. And then there's also probably fourth quarter apportionments from this year that may not be used up. So that money will be, I think it's referred to in a lot of these scenarios. So we will go did each presenter, were they able to have some slides so we can have more of a visual content? I think I saw most people have slides. Are you going to be helping them, Rachel, or they're doing them on their own?
I'm going to help Anthony and Hank, and everybody else can share their slides if you need to.
Okay. And so I think this should be, many of the budget questions have been presented in the scenarios. And we've had a lot of questions, so hopefully this can help clarify them more. But you know what I'm really concerned with? I'm concerned that I'm concerned with what's been happening at some of our meetings. And I'm concerned because I've heard a lot of people say they don't understand what's happening. And there's a lot of words being thrown around that are not particularly what I've experienced. Without really talking about the issues. I mean, they're just being thrown out there as I'm not quite sure. I think to be just to be making a scene, because I don't know what they mean in the context of where we're going. And I feel this is such a serious thing that we're up against. Myself as just an ethical culture member, I'm not sure our ethics are being lived up to. So I would hope before assembly, we can straighten some of this out. So without that, let's begin. What order do we want to go in, Carolyn? Let's alphabetical order. We start with Brooklyn.
Brooklyn.
But I heard somewhere it said Patty's an A. Is Patty an A or an H?
What are you using the name of the society, or are you using the name of the presenter?
I'm using the society, so it'd be an S.
Correct.
And
Okay.
I popped in just to answer some questions if needed.
Okay, so Bergen comes before Brooklyn.
Perfect.
Yeah, I'm sorry, apologies. We had, we're sitting Shiva for a member of a society,
So so do you want to start a
I'm happy
conversation?
to, yeah, I'm just happy to answer any questions if anyone has any questions about the budget. Apologies. That there's beyond circumstances beyond our control.
All right, why
Is there
don't I
any
do this,
questions?
Kurt? So you sit tight in your car and we'll start with Brooklyn, and then you can pop in later when people are warmed up. So Tom, go ahead and
Okay.
start.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Liz. So I don't have a presentation, and also keep in mind, Brooklyn is proposing a consensus process. That also includes consensus on the budget, where we get to talk about the relevant issues like apportionment, and I guess we can get into uses of the Adler Fund for training, what have you. So I'm just going to take a minute to talk about a couple of things, just informationally, based on my 3 years experience as AEU treasurer. One thing is that the AEU budget doesn't have to be all that complicated on an ongoing basis, leaving aside the exceptional aspects of FY24. And I see you're shaking your head, Rachel. We can talk in a bit. So I think the first thing has to do with what the major sources of funding. For training, certainly you have the Adler Fund that's used to go ahead and fund the leader training and internships and the dean and what have you. But when we talk about apportionments, historically the number's been about $200,000, and that's mainly been for operational costs and for the cost of an executive director and the cost of a communications coordinator. When I was treasurer, we really made an effort to try to go ahead and cut back on operating costs, and that's continued within the past year, so that we've gone down from like over $100,000 on operating costs to something in the $20,000 to $25,000 range. It's been a tremendous reduction. And then a half price or a half time executive director only costs about $60,000. And then if you're talking about a communications coordinator, we're talking about $53,000. And if you give some credit to the AE, to the executive director, for increasing fundraising, which has historically been the case, then we're talking about under $100,000, to support an executive director and a communications coordinator. So I think the apportionment question should be juxtaposed with the cost, at least historically, of a part-time executive director and a communications coordinator. And I think Jake does many valuable things for us in terms of the website and social media and supporting our different networking efforts. And if we're talking about apportionments closer to $100,000 for that purpose, then I think we're in the range of talking about voluntary apportionments. But then others, including Rachel, make the point that, hey, do we really want to jump to voluntary apportionments? Aren't there things that all societies would benefit from, like new society development, or helping new and growing societies who have leader training costs and the like? Maybe we shouldn't be so quick to move to the voluntary apportionments. All very good questions, and then as part of the Brooklyn proposal, I think we should go ahead and talk those through and try to see if we can come to a consensus on the best way to move us forward. And that's all I want to say. Thank you. Oh no, sorry. One more thing. The Washington figure about using 3.4% of the board and leadership funds for an annual drawdown. That differs from the studies done by David Swenson of Yale, which is sort of the Bible on nonprofit drawdowns from endowments. And he says that 70% of endowments use something in the range of 4 to 5%. In Brooklyn, when we're taking a look at our funding based on our endowment, we ended up using a 4.25% figure. So I think we should have a discussion about what 3.4% or a little bit over 4%. So I just wanted to raise that as a concern. Thank you.
Okay, do we have questions for Tom? Any questions on his, I don't, Carolyn?
Just clarifying, Tom, because there's a lot of sort of balls in the air about where we're going to go with the budget and things like that. Your sense is that we have a figure of expected income that the Finance Committee has reviewed. That's apportionments as they stand, and some percentage of investment income that we traditionally draw each year. And that's really it. Everything else is something else that
plus the first monthly fund, the second monthly fund, the Rappaport fund. Yeah. So there's some limited set of money there. Yeah.
So we're just looking at that real money as opposed to what is potential money. So, and I understand that there are funds that are carryover for other programs, but those are restricted. So really talking about unrestricted funds here. Each of this, and if we take this time to do a consensus version of the scenarios, blending them together or picking and choosing or however that process works out, then the expenditures that go with that scenario are something that would have to be approved later at the time we work out what the consensus really is. So we're really only talking about income right now. And when it comes to, once we come to consensus, then we'll know what numbers we need to be pulling, how we need to spend.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we're talking about the 4-month period that Brooklyn's advising with regard to the consensus period. And of that, only a fraction occurs within the new fiscal year. So we're going to go ahead and vote on the budget theoretically. I don't, I've been reading some of the back and forth on other possibilities. But if we vote on the scenario and if somehow the Brooklyn one passes, right, then FY24 would go ahead and cover August and September.
Yeah,
And then October, November, and a little bit into December would be heading into the new year. And what we're saying is, okay, let's continue current spending policies and then spend our time on consensus. One of the major topics for consensus review is the apportionment, and I'm saying there are topics that relate to the apportionment that need to be considered. But I'm really hoping we talk about what we want to do long term on this. But I understand also that life is short, so and that we have to cover the short term as well.
yeah.
Rachel.
Just a clarifying question. Sorry, Tom. The first quarter of next year, where does that money come from, according to Brooklyn?
The first quarter for next year. Well, I mean, I'm certainly fluent, based on the finance committee, what was talked about in terms of using I'm not getting into the Adler spend down.
Can't spend that money, Tom.
No, I understand that. That's why I'm not getting into that particular piece. So if we're talking about 2 months out of the 12-month fiscal year on that, I mean, in terms of cash flow, I would think that there'd be sufficient money in the percentage of the board and leadership fund plus Mosler plus Adler. No, it should be plus Mosler 1 plus Mosler 2 plus Rappaport might be able to go ahead and cover 2 months without this becoming more of an issue. But if you want to go back and forth on the interim numbers, we could. I'm more concerned about us coming to a consensus on our broad long-term fiscal approach. But if we want to go ahead and talk about cash flow for 2 months, we can talk about cash flow for 2 months. I'm not prepared to do it tonight, but always glad to have a fiscal conversation.
Okay, I just want to say, Tom, I was trying to just ask a clarifying question, and I feel like I was a little diminished in your response. Like if you want to talk about 2 months, but I don't really want to. I mean, I'm just being really straightforward and just asking a clarifying question. And a quarter is not 2 months. It's October, November, December. I'm not trying to be picky here. I'm just asking a question. Okay, let's
Yeah, Rachel, it's not my intention to go ahead and be diminished, but I think we're talking about 2 different goals here. Through the consensus approach, and then ultimately through the planning process we go through, which may or may not include the organizational development process, we're talking about trying to establish a long-term foundation for the AEU going forward. In terms of figuring out on a cash basis, based on the discussions we had previously within the finance committee, I think that's kind of a different scope of the discussion. And my smiling on this is just reflecting personal nervousness from the standpoint of communicating with you, and then also going ahead and trying to deal with the details associated with cash base versus kind of long-term, fiscal strategic planning in terms of having these discussions, so we don't have people, glaze over too soon this evening. But it's not out of any disrespect, Rachel. That's certainly not my intention, and I apologize if you took it that way.
Any other questions?
Mike?
Yeah, this isn't specifically for Tom. I guess this is all proposals, but I feel like I've been remiss as president of the Philadelphia Ethical Society. Many eyebrows have been raised in Philadelphia when talk about the Rose Rapport Fund is discussed, sort of using that money. It has very specific purposes in the will that provides that money. So that it could potentially be used, but it would need some massaging or some narrative to sort of demonstrate that it does fit those reasons.
Yeah, of course, and that goes for the 3,000 from Rappaport, the 8,000 or 10,000 from each of the two Mosler funds, the Adler Fund. I mean, obviously, in all of these, we have to be respectful of the, the requirements of the trust or the wills, whatever it is, the guiding, legal basis for the use of those funds. Absolutely. Just like we also have to be mindful of what best practices are in terms of the drawdown from the board and leadership funds, the 3.4 versus 4.25 question.
John Dakin and Abby,
Actually,
are we
me.
joined?
Yeah, it's actually me. I'm sorry, I missed the previous budget discussion, so I may have missed hearing about this, but I'd like to understand. So at the business meeting, on the current agenda, it has us voting on one budget. So can you help me understand why we're talking about 6 budgets here?
So that may be a misnomer. We're not voting on one budget. That was posted as a reference point. That is so that's void. So ignore what is on the delegates' website, because what that represents is if we went forward with apportionments, the 177 plus it represents I think it's the 4.5% drawdown. Now, since scenarios have come up with all kind of different versions, that is void at this point unless someone's adopting to go forward with apportionments only, along with the 3.4 drawdown as their budget, which I think one scenario does.
Liz, you're saying that the budget that's posted is no longer likely not to be relevant. But what I was actually asking about was the process. So in this meeting, we're talking about 6 budgets for 6 different scenarios, but then we're going to vote on one of them. Can you help me understand what the process is?
So each of the scenarios have a budget component, and that budget component will come with that scenario. So I see Carolyn raising her hand. Do you want to clarify further, Carolyn?
Abby, what is on the website was posted by the deadline of June 30th. And at that point, we had only just gotten word that there were 3 new scenarios to look at. And so when the finance committee met, they, by consensus, agreed that, first of all, whatever budget is going to come for this coming fiscal year, we're going to look at what we believe is real income, not what we want to raise, what we might get, what we will work hard to do, but just what we feel is real. Now, given some of the new proposals, some of that may not be as real as we had hoped, but the number that they had was $177,000 in apportionments and about 34,000, I'm making this up, something around that number for drawdown from investments, where we typically every year or most years take that drawdown. Nothing else, non-restricted funds, nothing else. And that's really what we had. We were asking for scenario proponents to submit a budget to come with their scenario, so that people who wanted to evaluate the scenario could say, what's the price tag? How much is this cost us to do?
Was the intention that the scenario budget, so the background on this is, I have to honestly say, I'm having a little trouble imagining that I'm going to be able to vote on make a decision about a budget when the scenario will only just have been decided. So I'm really struggling with that.
So are we. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
no, we are, because things came in varied formats with somewhat, sometimes it's difficult to lay out apples to apples on all this.
Yeah, sure.
So part of what we will be looking at is if, and I believe the question, and it's a parliamentary question as much as anything, if we pass a scenario which has a complete budget attached to it, then if that motion is phrased so that the budget passes with the scenario, that action is done. If by chance, and I'm just not really sure how, a couple of scenarios seem to have a detached budget, so we have to look to make sure, we may have to continue through the process and have a formal discussion of if that scenario passes, what we're going to do with that. We all also have some questions about special assembly, and we really shouldn't get into that right tonight. We'll talk about it tomorrow. But the intention is that we will have a clearer understanding of what we're going to vote on once we have a chance to look through all of the issues related to the agenda. And we may only be voting on the income, the distribution, or the gathering of income for the vote in July, or we may be voting on income and expense depending on the scenario that is adopted. And if the Brooklyn scenario is adopted, we may have budget for a period of time, but then there will be another budget considered at a later assembly as we have consensus. So it's
Just out of curiosity, what happens if a budget doesn't pass?
if no budget pass,
Yeah, just
I
out
don't
of
think that will happen. Some budget will pass in terms of income. There will be something passed, but the order will depend, and how we do it is going to depend on
The scenario.
which scenario is adopted.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
I'm sorry it wasn't clearer.
It's, any other questions on Brooklyn? Zia?
Okay, I'm unmuted. I just have a question for Tom. Did I understand that you said that we will have a part-time executive director? Was Bart part-time?
Yeah, Bart was part-time, and the percentage FTE that he worked changed over time. It started off as, I believe, 12 hours out of 35 to begin with, then moved up to 14, then 17, then 24, and then after Elle passed away, he was working full-time because he was taking over administrative duties as well. So
It's also a leader.
yeah,
right?
I mean, it depends what you want to have an executive director do. So I think there needs to be kind of a deep dive into executive director functionality. I mean, do you want to have, a role with regard to new society development, or do you want to have somebody be the voice of the AEU? I mean, there's a list of functions that I've compiled and that we can go over about what the executive director has historically done. If you've got a proposal to say, well, we don't need an executive director, then the question is, all right, do you want to not perform those? Do you want somebody else to go and perform those? I mean, I think you have to go through a checklist. So, and Atul Gawande.
I mean, even though he was a part-time executive director, but he, being a leader, was still involved in his ethical society. But if you get an outside executive director and just have him part-time, will that work for us? That he would only be partially responsible?
I don't know. That could be a topic of the consensus process. It can also be a topic of the OD. The process. It's not for me to decide. I'm just letting folks know that he was part-time, because when people talk about the ED, I think it's from the perspective, okay, let's get rid of a full-time position. But no, it's historically, it hasn't been a full-time position. It's been more like a half-time position. And as for Bart, he was a very busy guy. He had his own congregation and he had the AEU. And then he also worked as a as a clinician with what, in terms of mental health, social work related practice. So very busy fellow.
Thank you.
Okay,
Liz, can I just make one request? If someone could, from West, could give me the backup for the 3.4%, that would be helpful. So we could contrast that with what the literature says on nonprofit drawdowns, because we had to do a deep dive on that in Brooklyn and coming up with our budget recently. So I'd be interested in where you got 3.4 from. Thank you.
okay. So I think what we should do is, Anthony, I understand that Hank's kind of uses your scenario as as he more develops his scenario, but I believe that if you go first, then Anthony can come after you. Anthony, if you go first, then Hank can come after you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Liz.
Okay.
Liz, also, I was hoping that Bergen Society could get in so I could go back to the
Okay.
funeral.
So right after this, then we'll go over to you, Kurt.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. As it was stated, just for the record, I am not endorsing the regeneration proposal. I am basically just filling in for Patty, who had a family emergency. As a candidate for treasurer, right, it's my obligation to support our members through processes of difficulty. So just as a foregrounding, I want to mention 3 words that have been already stated multiple times. And that is especially looking at 3 categories that are basically defining our budget. That is unrestricted, temporarily restricted, and restricted. So the unrestricted are funds that are not tied to any particular expense. Temporarily restricted is like a grant that has a specific purpose, and the grant cannot be spent on anything else. Restricted is an endowment where there are rules that are set up for exactly how and if the funds can be spent or utilized. The regeneration plan income consists of 2 dimensions. We're looking at the apportionment and a 4.5% of the board and leadership investment fund. While there are and maybe additional unrestricted funds from donors that come in, we're only, as it's been stated multiple times, counting on committed funds. In addition, there is a $22,000 of temporarily restricted funds from this year's Musler Fund that has been earmarked for the Consulting Leader Program. And more of this will be explained later on the following slide. The Musler Fund specifically, of course, is coming from the New York Society. Approximately $32,000 that were not spent from the Adler Fund grant, also temporarily restricted, coming from the New York Society, and then approximately $3,000 to $5,000 from the Rose Rappaport Long Fund, also temporarily restricted, that's coming from the Philly Society. Now, none of these grants are multi-year, meaning that the grants need to be applied for each year, and the decision is made by the society. And they can decide at any time to not fund the American Ethical Union. Of course, we're basing it out of a long, legacy and history of them being approved. Now, the total operation unrestricted funds for the 2023-2024 is about $210,000. Now, when we're looking at the expenses that are connected to the regeneration proposal, the working group to regenerate the Consulting Leader Program is at the end of this process and close to being able to start the Consulting Leader Program. It is anticipated that everything will be in place by September 1st, and funds will start to flow from this item over the course of the 12th month. And for more information, please reach out to our interim executive director, Rachel Pfeffer. Now, there are funds for visiting leaders that will continue. We may ask the NLC to co-sponsor this administrative effort. And we, of course, have to evaluate the capacity and energy. When we're looking at the YES conference, again, we anticipate that if the YES conference has the energy to continue next year, that one of the ethical educators at one of the societies will work with the students to organize it. Again, we're not making any assumptions about which society the education team will work on supporting this effort, however. Now, in terms of the organizational development consultant, it will be in a bid out, and we may spend less. We don't know. In terms of the personnel, which includes program and communication support, we see the number right here. It's about 56,000. In terms of administration, of course, we're including money for additional restorative justice training, our bookkeeper, insurances, internet platform, and other essential administration costs. And then in terms of partnerships dues, right, that are connected to other outside organizations, we're of course going to enter into a re-evaluation process or regeneration process in terms of how do we sustain these memberships. As of now, as of this year, we're holding 2 membership dues. One is with the Secular Coalition of America, and the other one, Humanist International, leading then the total of expenses to 201. So we have a cushion, and I think that that's really good and a place to be.
Okay, any questions?
Carolyn. Can you please unmute for me?
Got this big sign saying I'm muted. On the budget plan, the income budget, you have the general funds of 177 and 30 that we talked about that we think is quote real money,
Correct.
as opposed to the carryover funds, which are restricted. You said a portion of those carryover funds were already dedicated to the consulting leader program, and then when you went to the expenses, you showed where the consulting leader program was funded, but you added it up to SVES added it up. You didn't do it, Anthony. I'm just sorry, but it's added up to be as if it's part of the total there. And yet it's really carryover funds from the previous year. So that $22,000 maybe shouldn't be in the total of planned expenses under this plan. Just saying. But then the other thing I noticed, I was trying to figure out is what about the costs associated with the organizational development consultant? I mean, I know we got to pay a salary, that's a piece of it, but I thought I heard meetings and travel and other things. So there are some operational expenses that would go with that. Is that shown in the budget, or is that just going to come along later?
No, Carolyn, ding, 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 you get a prize for noticing the $22,000 showing up. Ding, 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 prize for Carolyn. I was waiting for someone to say that. That's so awesome. Yes, in fact,
It's an
that
accident, I'm sure.
doesn't belong there, but we put it there, which shows that we have a nice cushion, okay? Because the operating budget is actually $22,000 less. Cushion. Okay, getting back to the costs for travel are part of the OD's expenses, but also in the administrative fees, because there's money in the administrative fees for board travel. If you look at the comparative budgets, you see much more detail. And so, you can see it all there.
All right. Okay.
Included, not coming along later, all included with a cushion.
I like that. Use cushions every day. Sorry. Go ahead. Thank you.
And don't they help, Carolyn? I mean,
Yes, they do. As a matter of.
Okay, do we have some more questions for Anthony? I guess you were very clear and concise.
And
Anthony.
Carolyn, do you mind putting your electronic hand down, please? Just so that there's no confusion.
Hank had his
Okay.
hand up. Hank had his hand up.
Hank?
I would
Yeah.
like a comment and a question. The Maslow Fund will specifies that half the money is for spreading the movement nationally, which we can legitimately use for the Consulting Leader Program, but half the money is spent for leadership training, which if we have a budget that doesn't have any leadership training, we cannot use that half. So that I think that we can say that 10.6 for the Consulting Leader Program can come from the carryover funds, but that the other half, we'd have to find another source. Or in my proposal, I use this year's Maslow funds for that purpose. So that is a comment that I think we have to consider. The second thing is the figure. Just 1 second. Can you get to the
So
expenses?
just for clarity, Hank, are you shifting to your presentation, or is that a question directed to the budget that was just presented for regeneration?
Well, okay, if you want to respond to it.
No, I'm just for clarity.
Yeah, I mean, I was a little, I thought you were talking about yours, Hank, which is why I put up your budget, but I'm sorry if I jumped ahead.
Okay, what I'm commenting on is that we can only use half of the Maslow funds in carryover for the Consulting Leader Program without violating the will, since the Maslow funds half is specified for leadership training.
So
Liz, you want-
this gets very specific. I think this would be something to really sit down with the scenario that gets voted in, because in this particular case, the Maslow Fund has two pieces to it. The one that says it must be a female minority, and it
Or
must
female
promote the
or a
movement.
minor.
So you get, so anything though can be created that may have aspects of that. We've done some very interesting things with the Maslow Fund. So that was $10,000 last year. The Adler Fund is not as specific as it is more of what we've used it for. So if this scenario got adopted, you would basically have $54,000-ish, I think it is, to look at how to make that work for promoting the movement, for leader involvement in the movement, and pieces of leader training that is still there. But that specificness, we need to wait until a scenario gets voted in. It sits over to the side, but the day in, day out monies are the ones that Carolyn mentioned, which is the monies that we know if we continue with proportionments that was just proposed. So let's hold those other monies off to the side and then see what scenario gets in, and not try to allocate them right now. Is that okay?
Okay. The second question is the $35,000 shown for administration is broken down in earlier things to include 10,000 for administration and general, 5,000 for bookkeeper, 10,000 for board travel, 10,000 for team travel, which is for the working with the OD. And that the $10,000 for administration in general is down from $35,000. Excuse me, $25,000 that was spent, $7,000 for rent for the office, $4,500 for leasing of equipment, $4,000 for insurance, $2,800 for our payroll services, $4,500 for software, $3,300 for internet and telephone, and $1,000 for supplies. So I think the budget assumes that from day one, we're going to stop renting the building. We're going to get rid of the equipment. And even that would save us $12,000. I'm not sure where the rest of the savings is coming from. Maybe you can chip a little bit away from it, but that if you look at the cost of even for our website, the cost of what we're doing with Zoom, that I think we provide Zoom services for the movement. I don't see where you can get from over $25,000 to down to $10,000. And I would like an explanation.
Okay. I think I would have to bring up the detail of the budget right now. If I look at the actuals of what we've spent to date, not necessarily the budget, but the actuals, it looks like we've spent $13,000, almost $14,000 on administration so far, plus $4,000 for board travel, and $33,000 for admin in general. So that's about, let's see, 39, 49, let's say $49,000, closer to 50,000. But that does, as you said, include the office, which is $12,000. We also this year switched over to a different bookkeeper, and so we're having some savings on that. We also didn't have an administrative person working, and so we saved some money on that. So we had a bunch of savings. So I was really looking at the actuals, and it might be that in the regeneration proposal, we might actually need additional funds, but as you saw, we have some cushion. And so the budget might need a slight modification, trying to be conservative and looking at actuals. So we can go over that in more detail. I'd be happy to do that. But and this is the crux of the issue for you, Hank, and the regeneration proposal is that you want the office, and we hear that. And the regeneration proposal is okay with giving the office back after some assessment, maybe the first quarter, the office will exist. Plans will be made to reasonably and sensibly deal with the office and then give it back to NYSEC so that they can actually rent it at market value.
Because it's really only $600 a month.
Right.
Right.
Well, 1,000 comes with the internet we're still paying with nobody there. the rental on the copy machine that we're paying that nobody's there, the phone service that we're paying and nobody's there. Okay.
Okay. So Hank,
Great.
and Anthony, should we move on? Any more questions? Because
Yeah,
yours
I
are
think-
tied together.
I think Rich has a question. Is that for Hank or for me, Rich?
I think it's more of a general question. I'm the treasurer of the Ethical Humanist Society of Asheville.
Nice to meet you.
And what we've done is to try to show when we prepare the budget for our membership to vote on, we have the actual budget that, excuse me, the actual expenditures from the prior year. And because of COVID, and because COVID has altered things, like our collections, we are collecting money if we're not in person. We had the actual expenditures from some of the prior years. In the situation that we're in now, we have 6, it's hard to keep track, but let's say we have 6 different proposals. It would be very helpful to have a spreadsheet with the expenditure down the left column, and across the top would be the actual expenditures that we had in 2022, 2023, and then
Here it
for
is.
each.
Here it is.
Okay. Yeah.
I created this. I've shared it. We don't have,
Okay. That's fine. I did that, and I missed it, and that is the important thing, because then you can talk about the differences.
Right.
And what is, it's very hard to look at a proposal and just say, okay, do I like that proposal or not, without understanding how does this proposal compare to something else? Yeah.
Right.
I'll look at that on the website.
Okay, Dorothy?
Yeah, this also is not specific to this particular proposal, but it's sort of a general question. In the past, there's been we're not doing fundraising this year, and I understand that. We're not in a position to do that. But in the past, there has been a line for board member donation, and Sonia, I know as she was leaving as president, gave us a little pep talk on how important that was. And there's also board travel. And I guess what I'm wondering is there any expectation for some token or otherwise board donation? And then my other question is, does there continue to be an expectation that the board funds a certain amount of travel? I think travel is really important. I'm really glad it's in this particular budget. I think it's going to be particularly important for if we hire an OD person, but I'd like to understand, the expectations of those items for the board.
So are you asking Anthony because he's presenting his scenario, which reflects a more committed budget? So are you asking Anthony, because each one of these scenarios have a different way of how money is going to come in and be allocated? So
Yeah, I guess then I need to ask Anthony, but it also is a more general question.
okay.
Yeah, so like it was stated, I don't know at what moment you came in, Dorothy, but thank you for asking this important question. The first line, right, clearly stated that, of course, we hope that people are gonna donate and continue in some form their financial commitment, right? But as it was stated at the beginning, we're just looking at the apportionment, right? And then the draw from the 4.5%. This is the plug, right? Based on your question, as a candidate for treasurer, this upcoming year, even though there is not 100% focus on fundraising and necessarily looking for money, I will be doing donor cultivation because, as you're saying, it is important, right, to demonstrate to people that yes, the doors are open in that regard. However, as you're highlighting, travel and connecting with the societies, with the people, and hopefully demonstrating, through this 12-month process, that there is something that people can actually invest in, that the work and the fruit of the labor that we will do hopefully reignites people, the programming, right, and the vision and mission of the AU in relation to the societies. So yes, and if I get elected, I would really look forward to hopefully meeting you, and if not virtually at least. Thank you for that question, Dorothy.
Thanks for the answer. Appreciate it.
And I
Thank you,
pass it
Dorothy.
on
Thank you.
to Hank, because I think my time is way overdue.
So we got Kurt. So are there any more questions? We'll move on
Yeah.
to Kurt, who's been sitting in his car.
Yeah, I'm waiting for this funeral thing. So the Bergen proposal, of course, is radically different in that we radically draw down the size of the American Ethical Union, right? So that the money goes back to the societies. Right now, we're still trying to figure out how to prop up the AU when we still should be propping up the societies. A good deal of the expenses that are in the other proposals is to pay for an executive director. We are not asking for that, at least for the next 3 years, which wipes out at least $100,000 in debt, which covers the cost of their salary, the travel, taxes, and expenses. We are also, of course, not asking for an organizational development specialist because, as you heard tonight, it's not only paying for the organizational development specialist, but it's also paying for their travel and their transportation office staff. That wipes out over $200,000 worth of debt right now. There was enough money through the dividends and interest in the current, and just as Anthony laid out, we have all kinds of unrestricted funds, restricted, and those can be used for different things that are named. Those monies can continue to be used for that, so we keep our Jake's position, we keep no one's talking about the RE director, and we're also keeping all the funding in all the committees, since the work of the AU is really done in the committees. It's not done by an executive director. As we heard, Bart was only part-time, starting with just 12 hours. We don't need an executive director as an organizational development specialist. I said you're not ready for one right now. You're also not ready for an organizational development specialist. And so we wipe out a tremendous amount of the debt that we're all trying to cover and finagle right now. There's already enough existing money through dividends and interest through those, like Anthony talked, we already have people making donations. Those cover all of our existing expenses. And I also agree with Rachel and others that we just closed the New York office. It's not really that useful for us anymore. And we decenter it from the New York region, and we share it with all the societies. The money that we're asking for, the apportionment, is actually drawn from you to go back to you. All of your apportionment money would go back to the societies. So if you gave money, you would then get 4 trainings a year. That covers travel for 3 of your society members to come 4 times a year to these very intense trainings that the Bergen Society is recommending based on our experience on organizational development and all the various things that we need to do. So that covers your transportation. I agree with everything everyone said about the importance of travel, but we need to have all the entire societies travel to one location like we did years ago when we all used to go to the God Box. I don't know if y'all remember that. Some of you have been around long enough to remember we go to New York and did those kinds of things. When we used to go to the Lay Leadership Summer School, there was enough money in our budget. What we're saying is you give us the money, we're then paying for those conferences and paying for your airfare, your travel, and all the stuff to come back all collectively together. That's why our proposal is to have one society representative, one representative from each society, and then that person brings 2 other people with them each time, all to this region. So you'd bring 3 people 4 times a year for these big meetings. That cuts out the board travel because the board travel is the board. That is the money, your apportionment, but it goes to your training. The other pockets of money, of course, go to grants that are then given back to your society. It also pays for your grant writing. So we'd all be a part of a grant writing pool. And I would help lead that at the beginning. You would come in every month and we would show you how to go after grants. We collectively write grants. The American Ethical Union should be putting money out. It should be pushing money and resources out, not in. I've worked for several national organizations, and this is the only national organization I've ever heard of, outside of denominations maybe, I've ever heard of where the home office is not sending money out and people are pouring money into it, and those societies are struggling, which just doesn't make sense to us. The Bergen Society gives $17,000 a year. It's dropped to $15,000. We gave each year to the AU for years and got nothing in return. And so we're saying that we would all use our apportionment money, which is voluntary. A society can say, listen, this year we can't participate. We would still try to lift them up and provide resources to them. But if they can't come, that drops off. That reduces our cost as well. But there is enough, if we don't have an executive director, we don't have the New York office, and we don't hire an organizational development specialist, there is more than enough money currently to do all of these projects that we're talking about. A national social action project, quarterly trainings for 3 of your society members to come out, a national grant writing workshop, and a national grant where we'd actually give you micro grants to your society and show you then how to use those to build up your people. So we have plenty of money within the AU budget if we just cut out those 2 big expenses, including the AU office, the 3 big expenses right there. We can just cut these down, keep funding the committees. All the committees need it, except for social action. If we do the National Social Action Project, we don't need that to be redundant. But all of the committees would keep their funding. Trish, the REs, the YES, all that money, we have plenty of money for that to keep that going. We don't need to find an additional funds. And the only thing I would have is that when that board gets together is to understand that they need to be writing grants. Donations in the United States are not enough to cover service organizations anymore. You just need to understand that. That's the research. There's almost no organization in the United States that can survive on donations. It's only like 8% of a typical nonprofit's funding. So I'm going to show y'all with our training how we can go through the 600 funding streams that we can develop, how to work on your value propositions, and all that is covered in your apportionment money that then goes right back to your society. And that's the way it should be, that if we are going to pull our money, you should then get these trainings and these travel, these micro grants, and these other things out. That's it.
Thank you, Kurt. And do we have questions for Kurt? I see that Lee.
Just a quick question. If you close the office, where would the committees and people meet? If there, are you still going to have a board, and where would the center of the organization meet?
Yeah, I would love for us to travel to different societies. That's a great way for us to get to know one another. There are many societies from between New York and Philadelphia, Baltimore. So I'd like to keep it into there, which keeps our travel costs lower. Austin, unfortunately, y'all have to be flying up. Come on up and visit us. We'd love to have y'all. But the Bergen Society would host. It could be the Brooklyn Society once they settle on this place, the New York Society, the Philadelphia Society, the Baltimore Society. And that's a great way for us to travel to each of the societies, hold our 2 or 3 day workshops there, and then get the strength in that, and then end that with some kind of a celebration on Sunday.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to applaud you, Kurt, for your emphasis on getting grants. In my career, I've gotten $2.5 million for nonprofit organizations for child welfare software development. It's kind of a different world. There's a large government component, but sure, getting grants can be absolutely transformative for nonprofits, and it's something we should be aggressively pursuing. And I just want to applaud you and Bergen for going that route.
Yeah, and I have never seen more grant money out there than I have now. I'm having people calling us and saying, could we use some of this money? There were several federal grants that just came through started originally in the Obama administration that have now come through in the Biden administration. that is backing up a lot of states with a lot of this grant funding that could trickle down to all of our societies. And what we're going to show you is how a model of grant writing that only requires 1 or 2 staff members to deliver up to $1 million worth of services. Because what people need to understand that when I write a grant, I write in all that staff, hire all those young people, and then get them to provide that kind of the work that it needs to be done. You don't have to have more than 2 people at your society working on grants. If you look at major granting agencies, and I work with a lot of them, and a lot of them are my friends, they've got maybe 6 people in the office handling $10 million worth of grant, right? The Volkswagen Corporation just gave $12 million to one of the organization I just left. They've got like 5 people in their office handling those things. It doesn't take a lot of people to deliver that when you're actually writing in the staffing, and that's a great way to build people into your society. I fund all kinds of people coming into the society and provide salaries. So, yep, that's all doable. Hank? You're maybe muted. There you go.
You're okay.
Did I lose you, Hank?
Okay. The Philadelphia Society has a long tradition of funding Camp Linden and running a summer camp for Philadelphia deprived kids and writing grants. But the grant money for Camp Linden, and if people from Philadelphia correct me if I'm wrong, has gone all to the camp, but none to support the leader or the Sunday school or the normal expenses of running the society. And I approve of grants. I think Camp Linden certainly helps build the membership of the Philadelphia Society, gives them a project that they can feel proud of. But the money in the grants goes to Camp Linden, not to the Philadelphia Society. And I was wondering whether the proposal to develop grant writing is really a solution to the fiscal problems of the society.
Yes, sir. So your grant writing needs to be one of your 6 income streams, right? So we're going to do stress tests on your society to look at your 6 income streams at least, and grants are do that. Currently, I was hired and started May 15th of last year, right? So I've been there just over 1 year as the full-time leader. Or actually, I'm part-time because I'm part-time for Silicon Valley. And so once a month I'm flying out to California. But since we started in May, I've raised $60,000, like I told you, for grants. And I just told us, let's put our fingers in the water and see what it's like. We just got another $1,500 grant yesterday. Now $20,000 of that grant covers my salaries. Eventually, what needs to happen is we need to train the leaders and how to raise their own salaries, which is an important part of when you're doing social innovation. And that's the kind of stress in the movement that we're seeing now nationwide, is that with our friends in Reconstruction Judaism and Reform Judaism, rabbis go through training and learning how to do social innovation, how to write grants and manage that to help cover their own societies. We can't no longer afford to have young people with $60,000 in debt coming out of college to be able to pay a membership dues into an organization like our own, right? We need to think about just serving them rather than hoping that somehow we can convince people who have no money to give us some of that extra piece of money to cover our donations at our societies. We have that with that, sorry to say, a privilege of expecting people who have disposable income to pay membership dues. I can show you how to raise that money to cover the leader's time. And that's what a leader should do. That's what I do. Eventually, I hope to raise my entire salary, which is what I did in my last organization. And that's what leaders should be trained to do. And we would put money in for your administrators. We put money in, we raised $6,000 just in a few months for our Sunday school teachers, all of that, and then all the materials and supplies, that would all come through grants.
So Kurt, I see we have two more questions, Jay and
Sure.
Vonda, but also Sarah has not had a chance to speak. It's 10 after
Yeah, okay.
9.
I'll keep it
So-
short. Yeah.
So Jay and keep the next two answers short and then we'll get on to,
Yes,
so
ma'am.
Jay,
Yes.
Vondra was before me, actually, so I just want to acknowledge that.
so you want Vonda, you want to go first then? Are you there?
Hi, Jay, you can go first.
Okay, great. Thank you. So Kurt, I've listened to you, and I'm curious. I went back to look at the Bergen mission to see what y'all were all about, to make sure that we were on the same page. And I noticed that, of course, Bergen is about focusing on community and good work. I hear the good work. I'm just concerned because I keep hearing this framework around employees and instead of members. And I would like for you to specify if you're going to, how you're going to manage the idea of an employee and a member. I'm also very fascinated with the idea of building capacity within each society, because it's a very bootstrap model, because certain societies might not have the capacity to do the grant writing and put forth all of that effort. So I'm curious as to, it's kind of like how I hear it. It sounds like survival of the fittest society. And so I'm concerned about those societies that necessarily don't have the ability to do that kind of grant writing proposal and so on and so forth. And I'm really interested in how you're trying to, and I'd like to hear clarity around this employment and member relationship. That's just very odd for me.
Yeah. So the first is you need to remember that 25% of the grants out there are called capacity building grants. Do you know that there are organizations and foundations that just give money to nonprofits to build their capacity, which is, we're going to give you money just to get organized. We're going to give you money to think of your strategic plan. We're going to give you money to think of your value propositions and things like that. I was a grant reviewer for both Robert Wood Johnson and for NEEF, National Environmental Education Fund. I was the person on the other end of the side who read your grant proposals. And what I can do is we can show you how to use this funding effectively. So in our proposal, there is a monthly grant writing group. Every single month, we all tune in together. I'm sitting there, I'm working because I'm looking at grants. You send your person or anybody you want to. I just did that class for the for the ethical culture movement, and there were 22 of you who attended my class, including some of the people on this call right now. There's a real hunger for people to figure out how to do this. And I'll say, hey, did y'all see this grant? It's come across my desk. If you're over in Philadelphia, this would be really great for you. Or if you're down in St. Louis or Texas, we would have copies of grants saying, here's how to do it. Here's what to fill it in. Here's the language that you can use. So it would not require much effort of all to show people how to do that. And we also had to think about this whole thing about membership. Societies, congregations should not be measured by the number of members per se anymore, because number is no longer working. If you look at the number of attendance, it's plummeting nationwide. Rather, we should judge a society by the people it serves. And that's the service component that we have at the Bergen Society. We're not interested in just saying, oh, we need your members, we want you to get to sign the dotted line. That's nice and lovely of people to do that. But we serve 63 other nonprofits within the Bergen County, 63 other nonprofits that I'm working with, write grants for. I just got grants for 3 other organizations. I was a professional grant writer and could do this, and I'm hoping to do that with the other people. So that's the kind of service model that we had to come back in. It needs to no longer be who is a member, but whom do we serve? Whom are we lifting up? Whom are we bringing out of poverty? Whom are we addressing wellness? Whom are we helping with healthcare issues? And that's what a society used to be known for, and that's what we need to go back to that model.
Thank you. Vonda, you want to go now?
Yeah, I just want to just express my enthusiasm for this model, and the fact that it's just giving us such a thread to put into our needles for a future. There is just so much that we could go after in our communities. I was just talking to Tom today, and it made me go and have a look at the Brooklyn Foundation and the Community Foundation for Brooklyn. 600 organizations out there that ethical culture can and we should be networking with. And by the way, if we network with them, we go out to the funding sources to fund our programs together. And don't you know, that brings us people into the movement. Once they're in, then we have all the dances we need. We have all of the other concerts we need. We can do so much other stuff together that really then informs and builds the movement.
Thank you, Vandra.
Thank you. Thank you. So Sarah, are you saying you want to speak or do you have a question?
Yeah.
I think I'm reclaiming my time.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So go.
Thank you. I want to start by saying that I think if anything, the last hour and 15 minutes has just reinforced my preference, and I think I can speak for my delegation, if that's all right, that, thank you, that the budget making process should be separated from the scenario decision process. It is far too complex to expect our delegates to interpret the proposals, the scenarios, and the budget implications in one fell swoop, in one vote. It's not clear if it would be in one vote. It's sounding from tonight that the vote on the scenario would become a de facto vote on a budget, and that has really not been clear until tonight, and actually it's still not clear. And that's why Wes has suggested that we would have a separate process and an interval after selecting a scenario in the month of August to work with the West board and the AAU board and the AAU finance team to develop a careful, realistic, detailed budget, which could then be voted on at a second assembly. I just feel like that budget making process should be happening in a neutral, calm, not rushed environment. And I think that'd be better for everybody in the long run. If that is not to be, then I think it's very important that we get clarity before the business meeting about what exactly we're voting on. So is it the case that the budgets associated with each scenario would then be binding for whichever one is approved? And does the board commit then to instantiating that budget associated with whatever scenario gets the most support? So I think it'll be important to have some clarity in advance of the business meeting. Okay, so I will briefly now go over the budget information for the two West scenario proposals. And again, because we thought it was important to have the budget discussion separated from the scenario discussion, we did not provide a great deal of detail. So we've got a higher level budget overview that I believe demonstrates the feasibility of both of these scenarios. But I think it points out a problem that there were not consistent instructions given to the people proposing scenarios. And so we do have an apples and oranges situation. So I'll talk first about the motion to reform the AEU. So in this scenario, the AEU would not hire an executive director for the next year. We would instead hire an organizational development consultant at halftime, approximately $60,000 per year. And we would fund key programs using outsourcing grants to support different societies. So specifically, the drawing from the Mosler Fund, the Mosler Fund would be used to fund the NISAC grant using unused consulting leadership program funds and additional funds from the Mosler Fund to NISAC. Other outsourcing grants and the OD consulting contract and other unavoidable expenses, which would be much reduced, would be funded by drawing down the spendable portion of the AEU Leadership Fund. And apportionments would be optional for the coming year. So again, not eliminated, but optional. So the AEU would provide the grants totaling about 90 to 100,000 to these societies to administer these programs, drawing down from restricted funds, including Adler, Rappaport, and Mosler, rolling over budget surplus from 22-23, and drawing down on the spendable portion of the AEU Leadership Fund. Now, the amount to be drawn down by the Leadership Fund depends to some extent on the voluntary apportionments that are given for the coming year. And if those apportionments come in at about 50% of what they did in the last year, there would need to be, that would reduce the amount needed to be drawn down from the Leadership Fund to almost zero, to less than $2,000. So again, there would be some adjustments that would be needed to be made here, depending on apportionment income. Another reason to hold up on establishing a detailed budget. I will stop there and take questions since we only have 8 minutes left.
So I see Rachel and Dorothy, and then Lee. So Rachel?
Sarah, thank you for that. I'm wondering, is there some way you could actually put those figures in a slide so that everybody could see them? I'm not right this second, obviously, but could you just add it to, send it to us and we can distribute it? Because it just, or actually, as I've asked many times, to add it to the comparison budget that I showed Rich. You know, it's for sure you knew that we wanted numbers because the finance committee asked everybody, and I know John was on the board and heard all that. So for sure you knew we needed numbers, and I just don't understand why we can't get numbers if you have numbers.
Didn't the President's Council Google Group receive a spreadsheet from Sarah?
No.
It was posted.
So Rachel asked for all scenarios to provide their budget numbers so she could put it in the comparison chart. So that's just basically, and then as Rich said, he would like to see that. So I think that we're pretty much complete. Who's left?
I helped Sarah build it. It was sent out to the President's Council before the 30th of June.
So maybe look into that and send it to Rachel.
No, maybe you could use the comparison chart and put your numbers in there like everybody else did. What you sent to the President's Council, unfortunately, is not transferable onto it's mostly the profit and loss statement, which proves that it's doable, which is what Sarah said to begin with. But it would be really, really helpful if you wanted people to understand the budget to put it on the comparison chart. That would be awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we're willing to do that, but it would be good to get some clarity about whether those numbers are then binding, or is that considered a provisional budget pending the full budget process.
Right, because if you put the numbers in there and then you have your assembly where the budget's not chosen, it is productive for Wes. I get that, but I think that
I don't follow that.
If it's added to the comparison chart, it has no binding power. It's just for comparison purposes.
Right.
It only is binding if the assembly actually
Votes on it.
votes and then it's approved. Is
Right,
that what,
this is
was that
just
what you
a-
were referring to, Sarah?
Well, so then would we be, when we vote, are we voting on the scenario plus budget? Or are we then voting on the scenario and then as a separate vote on the budget?
That is connected.
For some scenarios, there is a budget attached to their proposal, like the Susquehanna. If you don't want your budget attached, I guess you could do that. I'm not making the rules, but for comparison's sake, it would just be so much nicer if everyone could see your budget since you have numbers.
Which is fine, but then we do need some clarity on, so I guess I know you're saying that you don't make the rules, but somebody must, right? So that we know what we're voting on. You would just need clarity about whether we're voting on scenarios plus budgets or scenarios and budgets separately.
You know, the problem with this is that each scenario has such a different way that they're going to roll out. The budgets are just to give you some relationship to be able to look at them. They're not apples to apples. They're apples to bananas, to tell you the truth. So so it just gives you something to look at, it's, and frankly, so what if Kurt's budget got approved with Susquehanna's scenario? You can't do that. So this is complicated.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I see that we have like 4 people on top waiting, so just.
Yes, and do you want to take questions, Sarah?
Sure.
Okay.
And then I can do the other motion very quickly. Go ahead, Dorothy.
Okay.
My question is, for the societies that you're outsourcing some programs to, have they bought into this?
We have reached out to them. I have not gotten confirmation yet that they've all agreed to it.
Did you get any pushback?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. And then I'm just going to take a minute to say, I agree with what you said at the beginning. I really think the budget, I think all of these numbers are probably pretty, concocted a little bit. And I think budget discussion, an approved budget after the scenario is adopted, I think is really important, as opposed to voting one of these scenarios with a budget. I don't have a problem with the comparison on what they think the budget will look like. I think that's great, but I think the budget decision is important and should be separated.
I know I would feel more comfortable voting on a budget if I knew it had been fully vetted.
Mhm.
Go ahead, Lee.
You call me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Just one question. Did you, in talking about your plan, I know we're talking about the budgets, but did you, does your scenario include closing the New York office or no?
That's to be determined as an additional possible cost to be decided by the board.
Okay, so it wasn't included closing the New York office. Your plan did not include that.
Our plan doesn't specify that.
Because that would impact the budget for sure.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Carolyn.
Ready for me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Just a clarification, Sarah, about your question about the process and things. Neither the side-by-side comparison of scenarios that the President's Council prepared or the side-by-side comparison of the budgets are actually official documents. They are a convenience, an aid, if you will, to help people who need to have a little more information or maybe a little bit easier set up so that they can deal with things. And that being said, also, none of these budgets, to the best of my knowledge, have been reviewed by the Finance Committee. Everything sort of happened toward the end of the period when these things could be submitted. So those may be questions that delegates want to consider in terms of how we look at the budget. We are trying very hard to stay within the framework of the governing documents that control how we're going to do assembly. And you may have noticed that there's some question about what those documents are saying. So we are working as carefully as we can to make sure that we understand, so that certainly by July 29th, it will all be clear. But in any case, for now, we have worked within a framework that opened this discussion wider than we really imagined initially it would be. We started with a set of recommendations from the interim executive director to help us imagine a future. And so many more people have now become involved in it. So while that is comforting and cheering in some ways, it can be a little ragged around the edges. So we'll stay in touch and we'll keep trying to make it as clear as we can. And I just hope that helps.
Yeah, it does. Thank you, Carolyn. I know we're in uncharted territory.
Yeah, pretty much.
I think Kendra's next.
Go ahead, Kendra.
Good evening. So I just want to say, from like a board perspective, when Rachel initially sort of proposed this idea, people asked like, what would it cost? And board members pretty much unilaterally like balked at that and were like, no, we need numbers, right? And I think, it's probably hard to conceptualize choosing a scenario without some number attached. And it's puzzling to me that people find it confusing, because people on the board were like, we need to see a scenario with a budget attached. So now hearing people say it's too difficult to make that decision with a scenario attached is just sort of out of sync with the discussions that happened at the board level. And then I would encourage people really, the proposers of the other scenarios worked really hard with Rachel to get those numbers, understand, how things work, what the impact would be, provide those numbers. And so I guess I'm not sure why, WES as a society with a current board member and an immediate past president also, would work with Rachel to get that same kind of quality information. I appreciate it's a lot to digest, but I also think we have access to a lot of good information to help us figure that out.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think that part of it is really that we felt strongly that the scenario selection should come first, followed by a budget process.
Okay, we're 5 minutes over. Is there any more questions? Anybody want any more clarity, or can all come back tomorrow to listen to bylaws?
We have one more scenario, right, for Sarah to present?
Yeah.
Oh, right. Sorry. Go ahead.
I will try to be quick. So again, this is another scenario that was submitted by WES. It is the re-envisioning the AAU as a society-led organization. So under this proposal, the existing apportionment system is eliminated. And the AEU is then prohibited from spending more than 3.4% of all fund balances under its control in a given fiscal year. That percentage is chosen with a goal of being conservative, so causing the funds to be available in perpetuity. The AEU board is then directed to establish an asset allocation policy geared to a balance of growth and long-term capital preservation, if such a policy does not already exist. The AEU can then spend any disbursements from other funds or voluntary contributions that it may receive. So this proposal radically reduces the amount of money available to the AEU. Unrestricted fund income would be approximately $25,000. Additional disbursements from the Mosler Fund of about $16,000 and from the Rappaport Fund of about $3,000 would be earmarked for specific purposes. And then additional funds may be available for leader training from the Adler Fund. And then these budget numbers are included in this proposal, in the text of the scenario motion.
Any questions?
I could say more, but I know it's late, so I'm happy to take questions. Or, yeah.
What's the difference between the two?
Who said that? Somebody said, is that a question or is that a?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't raise my hand. So the difference between the two basically is the apportionment would be optional in the first one, and there would be no apportionment in the second one. Is that correct?
That's correct. You're asking about the differences between the budgets or the differences between the scenarios?
The scenarios.
That's a scenario discussion. I can say it briefly.
I just wanted to know the difference because you did give the budget in the second one, basically, and I didn't get the numbers on the first one, so if you can't say what the differences are besides the apportionment, that's fine.
Well, so in the first one I talked about, the motion to reform, there is suspension of not all non-essential AEU operations to create space for discernment and transformation. And then some key functions of the AEU would be continued and maintained through grants to 4 different societies. And a organizational development consultant would be hired at halftime.
Okay. Got it. You have to understand, for a delegate that's, far removed from you guys in New York or in Texas, this is all very confusing.
Well, guess what?
Thank you for your patience.
So, all right, I see John has his hand up. Should we make that the last question? John and or Abby, not sure which.
Sure, the chat is disabled, but if folks look into the assembly folder where it says resolutions for the future of the AEU and it says Wes's resolutions, you'll see a copy of our draft budget, which does provide expense line, income line, describes the outsourcing grants. It's not quite as granular as I think what Rachel was looking for, but I think it gives delegates a decent view of what they would be getting if they voted for the reform.
Yeah, I think John, what I heard Rachel is that she just wants somebody from West to enter it into the chart, whatever the numbers are.
Yeah, that's all I've been asking. Thank you.
That's all she wants. She just wants someone to type it in.
So if you go to the resolutions under West Motions, you'll find a spreadsheet there.
Yeah, but who's going to type it into the master chart? Anyway, that's what she's asking for, because then Rich can see everybody's in a singular line and he doesn't have to go to another place to look at Wes's. So maybe somebody can do that, or if not. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, anybody else? Shall we sign off for tonight? And we'll try to get things clearer. Each time I leave a meeting, I go, oh dear. So let's all convene tomorrow, and that's the last meeting till the 29th. Correct, Carol?
That is
the
correct.
business meeting, the business, yeah. Okay.
Have a good
Can we
evening,
have a
night,
training
everyone.
session?
8 o'clock tomorrow night, Eastern time.
Okay.
Can
Bye-bye.
the delegates have a special training session?